Hello, my name is Sharon Ashworth and I'm the Program Manager for the Douglas County Master Gardeners. Today I will be talking about incorporating native plants into your landscape. So I have a few slides to share with you about natives, and then I have some videos. I'll have a video of my yard and how I've attempted to incorporate natives into traditional landscapes for a shady lawn, and then we'll talk to some of the master gardeners in our demonstration gardens about some of their favorite native plants. Let's start by defining what a native plant is. The two plants that you see on the right, the purple liatris, the gayfeather, and the white penstemon, are both native to Kansas, meaning they evolved with the unique set of conditions that we have here in Kansas. The rainfall, the soils, the climate, the insects and diseases that we have all evolved together. And so these two plants can be found naturally in Kansas. They were not brought over with the Europeans. They weren't introduced by human hands. Now, the distinction here is the gayfeather, Liatris aspera, is native to eastern Kansas, meaning you generally would not find it in western Kansas unless somebody deliberately brought it out to western Kansas and planted it. Consequently, it might actually struggle to live in western Kansas because it did not evolve with the conditions, particularly the much drier conditions out in western Kansas. And the same is true of the white penstemon. It is native to western Kansas, and it might struggle here under the conditions in northeast Kansas. Now, the plant on the far left is a foxtail, and it was actually introduced and it has become naturalized, which means you typically find it. It doesn't need human help to spread. It grows very well here, but it did not originate here. It did not evolve in Kansas. So why do we plant natives? Well, the first thing that comes to many people's minds is that we plant natives for our native pollinators. Now, monarchs and honeybees are very important and we all love them, but there are so many more pollinators. There are hundreds of native bee species, plus moths, other butterflies, beetles, birds. So we plant our native plants to support our native pollinators. We also plant natives because they are low maintenance. Being adapted to our local conditions of precipitation and heat and cold and our soils, our diseases and pests, means that these plants are heat and drought tolerant. They are tolerant of our often poor soils. They are pest resistant and disease resistant, all of which means they require less water, no fertilizer, and no pesticides. Planting a variety of native plants will bring a variety of native pollinators, so plant flowers of different forms, colors, and bloom times. Now we'll take a look at my front yard, which is more of an experiment than a designed landscape. I'm trying to incorporate a few more natives into some very, very traditional shady landscape plants for the city of Lawrence. It's a bit of a rough transition to the video, so I apologize. I'm going to go through what I am trying to grow. Now, this might not look like a cohesive theme in my yard, but it's more of an experiment in growing in the shade. So, for instance, I have this right-of-way here that is highly erodible, and I've had a lot of difficulty getting things to grow. This patch here is actually a volunteer of some kind of solidago, a goldenrod. I'm not sure of the species yet, but I will be able to key this out later when it blooms. What has been successful is this little native here called Pachyra obovata. It's groundsel, roundleaf groundsel, and this does really well. It grows up to about a height of a foot and has a bright yellow spot in the shade. And I'm really pleased with that, so I bought a whole flat of it, hoping it will spread here. Another thing I'm trying in this right-of-way is a sedum, and I'll move over here and show you what that's doing. It's actually spreading quite well here, and it's beautiful little succulent leaves and beautiful white flowers here which it's doing quite well. So I've got both these things in here. I planted, here's a new little of the groundsel I've planted. I've planted them scattered throughout, so I've got the sedum and the groundsel, and we'll just see who wins, or if maybe they'll both survive in this right-of-way. It's a really tough spot. It's very wet, it's very shady. The other thing that sort of volunteers here that I'm decided to let stay are these carices, the sedges. And I've decided to go ahead and let them stay because they're doing quite well. Now, I know one of them that's here, this carex right here, is Carex alba. I can't say it's the loveliest thing, but it's mowable, and I happen to just like sedges. So those grow well. There's another sedge here that I find a little finer and a little more attractive, but I haven't figured out what this one is yet. This is what my front lawn looks like now after removing any of the remaining grass. Now, most of this vinca was here before we moved in, so it's just had a time to spread. So that's what is generally traditionally a ground cover and shade, is the vinca, commonly called periwinkle. And that's what this is here. And it's got pretty blue flowers. There's a flower right here. But it's taken several years to get this thick. And I've seen some really nice stands of it in other shady lawns, but it took a while to get to this point. Now, this other purple flower that's in here, this one right here, is a juga, or bugleweed. And I've done something interesting with that over on the other side that I'll show you in a moment. So what else I've got growing in here that will handle the shade is the wild columbine that stands up above this carpet of vinca, this wild columbine. It's nice and pretty. It's a different color, but I do have to warn you that it does sort of pop up randomly. Once you plant it, it will just pop up wherever it sees fit. And so sometimes you might want to thin that, or pull it out from places where you no longer want it. Over here, this pretty flower is a woodland phlox, Phlox divaricata. And that actually is also volunteering after I planted one or two plants of this. But I really don't mind that popping up. It's not as aggressive as the wild columbine. And I like to see that spreading in the lawn. This right here is wild ginger. This is a native. The phlox is also a native. So wild columbine, the phlox, and then this wild ginger here. These are all natives. The vinca and the bugleweed are not. This wild ginger has taken over in some lawns and can be a nice filler, nice good ground cover, can even be aggressive in some instances. But in my yard, it really hasn't taken off. I had hoped it would do better, but it seems to just hang out in this small patch, and that's the extent of it. Another plant I have in here that's native, but I find a bit too aggressive for my taste, is spiderwort or Tradescantia. It's not blooming yet, but this plant here, it has beautiful purple blossoms, and it is lovely. It is a native. It is easy to grow. It grows in the shade, but it does spread. And it's easy to pull, but it keeps coming back. So you can see there's some spreading of it through the yard. And so I tend not to recommend that unless you want it to start covering more of your yard. And then, of course, I have the traditional hostas around the bottom of my oak tree here that I've mulched around. Another native, and I have coming up over here is Solomon seal, and that's not quite blooming yet, but it's a lovely little woodland plant. Adds some height. It's a nice to mix in with the hostas, and it's got little white blossoms that will hang down from there. And so that is Solomon seal. A non-native and very, very popular ground cover, in addition to the vinca and the ajuga, the bugleweed, is the liriope. And I have planted quite a bit in here. Here's the new growth coming up for this summer. And as you can see, it forms quite a thick carpet. Here it's mixed in with the vinca. So if you're looking for something that you don't want to mow and gives you some height, well, it's about 4 to 6 inches off the ground. It's got beautiful spike flowers when it blooms, but it can be aggressive. Right now it's sort of, it tends to creep in the edge. I've used it because it works. It grows in the shade. I don't have to water it. The same with the ajuga and the vinca. They're pretty easy to care for, but they're pretty typical, pretty common, not too exciting, but they all flower beautifully, all in the blue-purple family of colors, and they do work in dry shade. So, but I have at least been able to show you a few things that are native if you want to go native. So the phlox, the wild columbine, and the wild ginger. Moving over to the other side where I've taken out the grass, I have planted a large patch of the bugleweed, the ajuga. And I showed that to you on the other side. So here's another close-up of that flower and that plant. And it's done quite nicely over here. I have quite the carpet, and it can be quite stunning when the sun hits it nice certain parts of the morning, and beautiful purple flowers, and it's done quite nicely here. I've had to fill in a few holes here and there, but I prefer this, even though it's not native, but it does well, and I prefer it over having to mow the grass. It's a lot prettier, and I do see bumblebees enjoying this. What I've done over here is I've tried that wild ginger again. I've put it in a circle around my dogwood here. I've got a flowering dogwood here, Cornus floridus, and I've got a little patch of wild ginger that I'm hoping will spread. It looks healthy and green. It's not gotten much bigger since I planted it, or not spread much since I planted it, but I'm happy to have it here. And when that flowers, the flower is really understated, but very interesting. And here's one right here, the flower of the wild ginger. So, which is just something different and very subtle. Something that's volunteered in my yard in the wet area. This is something I'm going to be renovating over here and trying to figure out things that can handle the more wet shade where my sump pump dumps out. That you can see over here is mayapple. And I did not plant this, it's just a volunteer, but I want to show you this lovely flower on the mayapple. So I really enjoy having these little woodland plants in my front yard. So I have a shady little woodland yard that I can enjoy in the city and not have to worry about trying to keep grass alive. Now we are going to roughly transition to the demonstration gardens maintained by the Douglas County Extension Master Gardeners at the Douglas County Fairgrounds. First, I'm here with Marguerite Johnson, who is going to talk about these blooming snapdragons right here that aren't native but are an excellent complement to any pollinator garden.
I like to incorporate non-native plants with my native garden because some of them are host plants, and the snapdragon in particular is a host plant for the buckeye. She lays her eggs in there, the bumblebees go into the flowers. Beautiful colors. I mean, you know, what more can you ask in a garden?
We have an herb garden, and in that herb garden, while it's not a culinary herb, it's just a nice addition to just about any spot in your garden. I'm here with Master Gardener Sharon Davis, who's going to tell us a little bit about this plant right here.
This is one of the cultivars of the butterfly milkweed. It's an essential plant for monarch butterflies. It's one of the plants they will lay their eggs on, and it provides food for the larvae, the caterpillars. It's an easy to grow plant. It doesn't mind hot, dry weather. It blooms for several weeks, and it's slow to spread, but it will spread. Butterflies, bees, all insects love the bloom, and it's a nice bright orange color. It's a good addition anywhere in your garden.
Here at the medicinal garden, the KU Medicinal Garden, where the Master Gardeners have a demonstration area. And I am with Master Gardener Gretchen Beyer, who's going to talk about some of her favorite plants from the prairie to put in your home landscape.
Hi, it's early June, and these are examples of flowers that you would see early in late in spring, early just before summer. One of them that I particularly like is this pale purple, pale pink coneflower that's called Pallida. It's a little different than the regular echinacea because it's much more delicate. It has a narrower leaf as well. Another one that is very striking is this penstemon that blooms profusely in late May and early June with these really pretty kind of bell-shaped flowers that bumblebees love to crawl inside of. So those are two of them that I really like a lot.
Continuing at the Native Medicinal Garden, we have Master Gardener Margie Dick here to talk about another favorite right here.
And this is a rose verbena. It is a low standing native plant that is obviously sun loving and drought resistant. It does spread, but it's not invasive. It looks like it's just perfect for a rock garden. We have it in a bunch of beds out here.
To invite everyone to visit the Douglas County Fairgrounds Demonstration Garden and our other gardens. You can find the locations of our 5 demonstration gardens online. I will provide a link so that you can get maps and see what we have at our demonstration gardens. The one I'm filming here is our pollinator garden. And I'm recommending this since this is a talk about planting natives in your landscape. You can find quite a mix of natives and annuals, native perennials, and some just like the snapdragon that complement the natives in a garden. We have lots of signage so that you can take a picture of the plant and its sign and try it in your garden. So please come visit us at our gardens. Master Gardeners are happy to chat with people who visit the gardens and can tell you all about the plants and how to care for them. And it's also just a nice place to sit. Find a shady morning and come sit in one of our gardens. And thank you.